Hi, I'm Andy from EasyRink. Thanks for joining me. This is blog 6 of 5 in a series that's about exploring system leadership and issues that affect system leaders. Blog 6 of 5, of course, is a complete nonsense. All it means, though, is that when I designed this blog series at the start, I never envisaged doing this blog. But it has become clear to me that this is a useful supplement for system leaders because I think it helps to frame a different way of coming at the job of changing a system from the status quo to something that is manifestly different. Purposeful design is the label I'm putting on it, and I compare purposeful design, or a counterpoint purposeful design, with the process of joining up or integrating the status quo. So in my last blog, I talked about how integration in health and care has been a major focus, and justifiably so. I'm not rubbishing that approach to change, but I think what I'd like you to question is whether sometimes the job of managing a system and leading a system isn't about taking what we already do and joining it up, but rather it's about saying that the world has moved on and that what the world now needs, the value we now need to be able to create, is different from the value that we once historically set out to create. I think health and care is a classic example of that, in fact, where once upon a time the major health challenge was around acute illness and the need to prevent diseases that were killing people in childhood and so on and so forth. We're largely on top of issues like that now, and now the predominant issues in healthcare are people who have multiple comorbidities, chronic long-term conditions, and the social determinants of health. Now, given that different world that we're in, wouldn't it be remarkable if all the capabilities we built to deal with the old problem happen to be exactly the capabilities we need to deal with the new problems of the world? So purposeful design encourages us out of the perspective of integration and joining up what we already do, and into the perspective of, given the difference that the world needs us to make, what are the capabilities we need to offer it? And I want to anchor that into a simple example from the world of public services still, but this time outside of healthcare. So this is development management. You may know it as local authority planning. This is the system that you'll interact with if you want to, for example, build a conservatory on your house. So you will need to seek approval, and the way you'll get that approval is by putting in an application which a planning officer will validate. In other words, they'll make sure that, for instance, your plans are to scale, that the site boundaries are clearly marked, and so on and so forth. And then they'll make a decision on that to either approve or reject your plans. And in the world of planning, where we've come from is sort of a perspective that says what we need to do is need to stop bad development from happening. And when we take that perspective, what we do is we build capabilities in processes like how to receive applications, validate them, and make decisions on them. But also what we do is we build capacity and capability around resubmitted applications. Because what we see is that applicants aren't necessarily terribly good at following our validation rules. And therefore, when we validate, we often go through cycles, frequently 4, 5, 6 cycles of sending proposed plans back for resubmission. In other words, we inflate one demand, one application, and turn it into several, drawing capacity into a process of revalidating and resubmitting. We also find our capacity being pulled into enforcement because through that process of revalidation and resubmission, time is lost and applicants become antsy. And they want their decision because they want to get on and build the thing that meets their needs. They're not building just for fun. So the planning departments tend to feel some pressure around that, and they want to be helpful. And in the spirit of being helpful, rather than saying resubmit when we would have to refuse this application, they very often add conditions to their consent. In other words, they'll say, well, your plans are good enough so long as what you do is you use these materials, these slates on the roof, these bricks on the walls, and so on and so forth. So by adding conditions like that, what we do is we create an enforcement burden. We need to follow up post-build or during the build to check that the conditions are being met, drawing our capacity out of our core process and into enforcement. And also taking this approach to development means that we find our capacity being pulled into an appeals process, because in not offering sufficient advice up front to help people propose yesable plans, we end up having to refuse sometimes. And that leaves people with needs that they felt they needed to build against not being met, and so they appeal or they resubmit again. And so what we find is when we approach the world from a purpose of prevent bad development, and we focus our capacity into the applications process, we find that capacity being pulled, and we find our effort and focus and capability building being pulled into areas that are essentially about preventing bad stuff happening rather than enabling good stuff. So compare that to purposeful design. When we take a purposeful design point of view, what we discover is that actually there's a really positive difference to be made in the world that applicants are crying out for. That actually what they really would value is some pre-application advice. They'd like us to help them propose things that are yesable by default and that meet their needs, to provide them with advice that allows them to design things that meet their needs and meet our quality criteria for approval. And what that does is it actually not only provides a more helpful relationship to citizens and those proposing plans, but actually improves the quality of plans as well, not just the ones that make it through the process, but all of them entirely. So when it comes to decision, what we're finding is that rather than having to add conditions or rather than approving things that just barely meet our criteria, we're able to approve things that sail past our quality criteria because they've come from a process of co-production. And in so doing, we find that we start to dissolve the need for capacity going into the validation and resubmission processes, because things arrive valid more often. We find that we have less capacity drawn into enforcement because people are able to meet their needs with plans that we've co-designed with them. And appeals wither on the vine because ultimately we're able to say yes more of the time. This shift to enabling good development from preventing bad development is not a dichotomy. We don't have to choose. It's not that enabling good development is at the expense of preventing bad development. It's about recognising that in framing our purpose from the positive difference we can make in the world, it helps us to think about where we put the balance of our time, focus, investment, and where we need to build our capabilities. In other words, it helps us to ask questions as system leaders about how does our focus, investment and capability building track to where we can make the greatest difference in the world. So I hope you found this blog series useful, and I hope that concept of purposeful design is illuminating for you. I'm sure I'm going to do more blog series, but that will depend on the feedback you give me on this one. So please do share those thoughts and comments, and in the meantime, thanks for watching.